The title of my sermon is The Called. I would like to start by reading First Peter chapter 2, verse 9. You are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, His own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of Him who called you out of darkness into His marvelous light. Now, let me begin with a premise that although only a few of us that will be ordained today, let me begin with the premise that all of us are called. Not just the elders, not just the deacons, not just the officers, not just the new set of officers that are elected by the nominating committee this year, but all of us are called. All of us are called in different capacities in the ministry. That's why if you look at our church has different functions, different ministries. Some you see people that are always here in front. Some people you don't see them here in front all the time, but they are in the kitchen. We call them the Dorcas or the Dorcas. The Martha ministry. All right, they are the Marthas of our church. I call this the ministry behind all the ministries, because every time we have a program here, there's always food, right? And they are the one that prepares that. By the way, if you are visiting our church, please don't go home after this, because we have the best potluck in town. All right? So you have to stay, because what we have here is just the first part of the fellowship. Downstairs is the second part of the fellowship where it involves food. So, we are called in different capacities of ministries. That's why if you go to Ephesians chapter 4, you will find there that some are called to be apostles, some are called to be prophets, some are called to be evangelists, pastors, teachers. And the purpose of this is for the equipping of the people for His service and for the furtherance of the work of God in the world. Today we're going to be looking at 5 facts, about calling, and we will try to address some misconceptions about being called. All right? And as we study these 5 things that I'm going to be presenting to you, we're going to be looking at different individuals in the Bible, especially how God has called them. Different experiences, different situations, right? So the first thing that I would like you to understand is this. Calling is about God's initiative, not human readiness. All right? So I know, just like what I said, we have some people to be ordained today, but all of us, remember that, all of us are ordained. All of us, are called to do certain things for the Lord. That's why this message is for you as well. And when you look at yourself, when God calls you, calling is about God's initiative, not human readiness. Especially if you try to look at the world that we are living. We are living in a world that is dominated by this merit system. And for some, to be called is special. Yes, it is special. But they have a different understanding of what being called means. For you to be called, that means you are special. You have this, maybe you have a degree that most of the people don't. Maybe you have a talent that most people don't. Maybe you have skills that most people don't. That is basically the result of being in this world that is dominated by the merit system. That's why some people, they would like to have this advanced education so that they have these letters at the end of their name. MDiv, PhD, right? Demon, all of this. But if you go to John chapter 15, verse 16, Jesus is telling us giving us a different picture. Because according to John 15, 16, he said, "You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you." You know, as I was preparing my sermon, I was actually reflecting on my own journey, how God called me. At first, I didn't want to become a pastor. I told you my story. I wanted to be an engineer. But the thing is, I was not good in mathematics. And when I assessed myself, what was the reason why I want to be an engineer? You know the reason? I told you the reason before. Because I want to be wearing, the white shirt, Hanes shirt, jeans with a T-square at the back of me. All right? I want to dress like that. So, at first, what this text is telling us is, it was not our choice, my dear brothers and sisters. It was not our choice at first. But it was God who appointed us. It was God who appointed us. When you talk about calling begins with God's choice, not our resume. When God looks at you, He doesn't look at the education that you earned. He doesn't look at the talents that you have. He doesn't look at the skills that you have. He looks at what is inside you, your heart. And when He sees something in there, sister, He calls you. You did not volunteer. He calls you. Calling begins with God's choice, not our resume. And we have people in the Bible. And a good example is Moses. Moses was tending sheep when God calls him. He was tending sheep. In fact, he was scared. He ran away. He was hiding. That is when God found him through the burning bush. Remember that story? Who else in the Bible? David. When God instructed Samuel to look for the next king that will replace Saul, He said, "Go to the household of Jesse." And when he found Jesse, Jesse presented all his sons. David was not even in the room. He was not even invited. He was not even considered. But yet, at the end of the story, he was the one that was chosen. Are you folks with me? He was the one that was chosen. Who else? Jeremiah. Remember the time that Jeremiah was called by God? He was too young. He was not qualified. How about the disciples? The disciples were untrained. They were fishermen. They don't qualify to go out. They're not good speakers. They're not good evangelists. And when you look at the story of the disciples, it starts with Jesus saying, "Follow me." They did not volunteer, "Lord, I want to go." Jesus said, "Follow me." Before giving them instructions and training. So my dear brothers and sisters, when you talk about calling, calling is about God's initiative, not human readiness. Because if calling were based on qualification, remember this, take note of this, folks. If calling were based on qualification, Moses would never have been sent because his background, he was a killer. Right? He was a killer. Jeremiah would have been disqualified by his age because he was too young to be God's mouthpiece. Peter would have been removed after failure because of his temperament problem. That's why I'm so glad, because when God calls His people, He doesn't look at our qualification, because I am not qualified, my dear brothers and sisters. Most of us are not qualified. So when you talk about calling, my dear brothers and sisters, calling is not God responding to our ability. It is God revealing His purpose to you and to me. That's why when you feel that God is calling you to do something, sister, God has a purpose for you. God has a purpose for you. I remember when I was ordained, one of the things that I mentioned, because I was reflecting and asking so many questions. And one of the questions I asked is, how come God called me? And what I realized is, the reason why God called me is not for me to be an instrument in the salvation of souls. Maybe that's part of it, but the primary reason why God called me to be in this position, to be in the ministry, is because He wanted to save my own soul. Because I was thinking, if I was not called to be in the ministry, I would probably not be in church. I would probably not be in church. All right? So the second one is, that's the first one. Calling is about God's initiative, not human readiness. So the second one is this. Calling exists so God's work can be revealed through human lives. You know, some of us, when we were called, especially when you were nominated by the nominating committee, right, Alvin? I don't know if you asked this question, Alvin. Maybe you asked this question. Why me? Right? Some of us have asked this question. Why me? Because there are other people that are more qualified or capable than me. You know, the answer to that is a text from the Bible. Look at this. If you are seeing that you are incapable because you don't have proper training, you don't have proper knowledge and wisdom to do what the office that is given to you, look at 1 Corinthians chapter 1, 26 to 29. It says, not many of you were wise by human standards. When you say not many of you were wise, that means some are wise, right? But majority of us are not wise by human standards. God chose the foolish, the weak, and those people that are not considered, like Moses, like David. And what is the reason for that? So that no one may boast before Him. So that no one may boast before Him. Let me tell you something. Because there's this misconception about calling. And one of the misconceptions is, you know, when you are called, you are there to represent God. You are there to represent God. That's why sometimes we are feeling the pressure. Man, I'm here to represent God. I'm here to represent church. That's why you begin looking at yourself. I don't think I can do that, because I might fail. I will fail for sure. That's a misconception. Calling is not about representation, my dear brothers and sisters, but revelation. Because you and I are not here to represent God, but to reveal His glory. What is the difference between the two, folks? You know, when you say representation, that is basically equivalent to being an ambassador. in some sense, we are an ambassador of Christ. But if you try to put yourself in that situation, you would feel that present. But if you try to, rethink it, that you are not there to represent God, but to reveal His glory, that's a different story. Because what you have to do is not to generate it on your own, but just to reflect the glory of God through you. So that means that when you live your life, it's not you that is doing it for you, but it is what? It is who? Christ. It is Christ, right? We are not here to represent God, but to reveal His glory. And when you try to look at the life of Moses, when he was called, the reason is not to show Moses' weakness, but to reveal God's power. Remember when he presented himself together with his brother in front of Pharaoh, right? God chooses the weak ones, the lowly, to represent Him and reveal His glory, so that no one will boast before Him. Consider the story of Jonah, the weakest in his family, the poorest in their clan. And after forming his group of 22,000 armies, God said, oh, it's not going to work. You have to what? Lower it down to 300. And for what reason? So that none of your army would say and think that you did it because of you. Number three things that you have to consider. Calling is an invitation into a relationship before responsibility. This is a big time thing. Because most of us, when we are called, we look at the responsibility right away. My dear brothers and sisters, the responsibility only is just the result of your relationship. Because the primary reason why God calls you to do certain thing is because He wanted to be in a relationship with you. Before God sends people to do something, He calls them to be with Him first, like Moses. Remember the story? We keep going back to the story of Moses. The burning bush before Pharaoh. The burning bush experience before Pharaoh. How about Isaiah? He saw the presence of God sitting on the throne. Before Isaiah said, "Here am I, send me." Who else? The disciples. He bade them to follow Him first before He trained them and gave them instructions how to evangelize, to be fishers of men. Because in God's kingdom, being comes before doing. When He calls you, He has a purpose for you. You have to remember that. And He wanted to be in a relationship with you. Right? Because He is basically not after the things in the ministry that you, sister, will produce. He is after the person that you're going to be. See the difference there, folks? Right? He wanted to be in a relationship with you. God values more about who you are becoming than what you are accomplishing. You can prophesy, according to Matthew chapter 7:23. You can prophesy, you can perform miracles, but still, it's possible that you will hear the voice of God saying, "I never knew you." Because these are the type of people who felt the calling, but yet they are more focused on the things that they can accomplish rather than establishing a good relationship with the Lord. Remember that, folks. When you feel that God calls you, He is more interested on who you are becoming than on the things that you are going to accomplish. Can I hear amen for that? Calling is rooted in a relationship, not results. Not results. The fourth one. Two more. Oh, I love this. Calling does not have to be spectacular to be sacred. Calling does not have to be spectacular to be sacred. Again, I reflect on my story, on my journey as a pastor. I began my ministry year 1998 after I finished, seminary. I worked for 2 months. Then after that, I went back to school. Went to AUP. I want to join the ambassadors. That's the primary reason why I went to AUP. I ended up being with the ambassadors, studying music. Then after that, I didn't stay for long because music course in the Philippines, in AUP, was so expensive and I don't have money. So I went back to the field, started working as a church pastor before coming to the United States. I was looking at my life prior to that. And I realized that I never had any experience or a moment that we can say spectacular, sacred moment when you really can tell that God is calling me. I never had that experience. That's why, I envy those pastors who had that experience. Like the experience of Saul on his way to to Damascus, where he heard the voice of God talking to him, like a burning bush experience in the life of Moses. I never had that. But what I know, folks, is during those times that I was growing up, because at one point of my life, I was considered to be the black sheep of the family. I know those times that my parents were praying for me. They would even wake me up in the middle of the night and pray with me and dedicate me to the Lord. My dear brothers and sisters, if you try to look at the people in the Bible, most people that God calls in the scripture did not see visions. They did not hear audible voices, nor have a burning bush experience. Think of Timothy in the New Testament. Timothy, he was called through the mentorship of Paul. He never had any experience like Paul. It was Paul who mentored him and directed him. It was Paul who saw something in him that led him, guiding him to become the Timothy that we know right now. Matthias, you know the story of Matthias? He was considered to be the person that was the replacement of Judas after Judas killed himself. He never had experience like the experience of the other 11 disciples, where they experienced God calling them to follow Him. In fact, it was the community that decided to elect Matthias to be the next, to be the person that will replace the spot of Judas. Acts chapter 6, it also mentioned about the 7. The book of Acts did not even bother to mention their names. It says they're just the 7. The 7, they were selected by the church to address the needs of the church, because some members are complaining, hey, all these widows, some widows in our church, they're being neglected. They need someone or a group of people that can address their needs. But they were called. They were called. One thing I realized, my dear brothers and sisters, as I studied this subject, sometimes God begins with a whisper before He shakes the room. Are you folks with me? For some of you, I'm talking to the ordinance today. Maybe you're saying, why me? I never felt that calling. Right? But when it comes to the Lord, sometimes God begins with a whisper before He shakes the room. And this whisper sometimes is given to the community of believers like this. And the job of the committee, the group of believers, is to discern it. And a good example here is in the book of Acts chapter 13 verses 2 and 3, where it says, while they were worshiping, the Spirit said, set apart for me this person. It was the Spirit that moves the community to set apart. This person never experienced that extraordinary calling like the burning bush experience of Moses. And that is basically what we're about to do today. Our church formed a committee. We call this the nominating committee. And this nominating committee discerned. They prayed. And they look at the people that are capable of doing things. You may not have experienced that personal calling from God, but the community saw something in you. Just like the case of Timothy, just like the case of Matthias, just like the case of the 7 individuals in the book of Acts. That's why you are here. You are here, right? God's call is often confirmed through the voices of God's people. And last one. The ultimate purpose of calling is this: faithful surrender. Actually I spent a little time on this in this last one, because at first I put there complete surrender. But I said complete surrender. Complete surrender can happen only once. Okay, I'm gonna surrender myself to you right now. But when you say faithful surrender, it's a lifelong surrender. When you felt that you are called by God, what you have to do, my dear brothers and sisters, is what? To surrender yourself to God, not only prior to your ordination, but this is going to be a faithful surrender. Every day, every moment of your life, you have to surrender to the Lord. Because when God calls, He doesn't ask, are you qualified? When God calls, He doesn't ask, do you feel confident enough? He doesn't ask, do you feel ready? Calling, ask only one question. And that question is, will you trust me with your life? Will you trust me with your life? Before God asks for action, He asks for surrender. Before He assigns responsibility, He seeks trust. That's why in the book of Hebrews chapter 11, you will find here a group of these pillars of the whole church. Pillars of the church. It is known to be a gallery of surrender, not of certainty. You will find there the story or the name of Moses, Gideon, Sarah, Abraham. And if you try to look at the story, especially with Moses, what did he do? When he felt that he is being called by God, what did he do? He protested. He protested. Gideon, he hesitated. Sarah, she laughed. And Abraham went not knowing where he was going. He just obeyed in faith. They did not feel ready. They did not receive guarantee. But yet all these people proceeded and lived by faith. That's why it's very, very important, folks, to surrender yourself to the Lord faithfully every moment of your life. Because calling is not about proving yourself worthy. It is about being willing to place your life in God's hands. That's why if I can go back and try to review the 5 things that we learned today. When you talk about calling is about God's initiative and not human readiness. You're not ready, I'm not ready, but God initiated it because He saw something in you. Calling exists so God's work can be revealed through human lives. You're not there to represent God. You are there just to reflect His glory. That's why it's very, very important for you to be connected to the Lord. Because if you're not connected to the Lord, what are you there to reflect? Right? Third one, being called is an invitation to relationship before responsibility. Establish that relationship with the Lord. And the fourth one, it does not have to be spectacular to be considered sacred. You know, it can be discerned by the community, and whoever this person is, you know, that is God's appointed person to fulfill the task. And last one, which is the ultimate purpose of calling, is faithful surrender to the Lord. So this time, I would like to request the congregation to please stay where you are as we proceed with the ordination.